Here in the northern Rockies, dark winter months are outlasted in basements, dens, and nooks, where kindred souls gather to share intel, swap fly patterns, and relive the memories from seasons past. This gathering spot, known locally as a February room, is the inspiration for this podcast. No matter the season, the door is always open to those with a fly fishing story to tell. Brought to you by CD Fishing USA, the North American distributor for Composite Development's fly rods and fishing accessories. Tech, precision, ingenuity, legacy. Go to cdfishing.us and follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. Here's your host, Lauren Carnop, and this is the February Room.
Good day, everyone. Justin here, and though it's been a relatively mild winter in Montana, our snowpack is actually looking pretty good, and we are anticipating an average water year on our local rivers. And with that in mind, there's no better person that I could think of than a guy with an intimate knowledge of both fly fishing and snowpack. Travis Kraft, welcome to the program.
Thank you, my friend. It's good to be here.
Well, we really appreciate your time. Travis, you're a longtime Montana guide and an outfitter now, and the director of the Avalanche Center, and have led a rather eventful life. Can you please share one of those events with us for starters?
Well, I think the best thing that I feel is, I chase trout for a job here in West Central Montana on our local rivers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a DIY trip. So what guides and outfitters do on their way out when they're looking for an adventure. I've always been inspired by like those first pioneers, like Leif Erikson, like finding a new land, or like the adventures like Yvon Chouinard climbing in Yosemite, or going to Patagonia to fish. So the best adventure I've had so far recently was in 2019. I got to go to the Arctic Circle, and it all stemmed from, everyone, you hear Alaska and people think of king salmon. They think of large rainbows eating flesh flies, things like that. Well, I've been there and done that. I haven't caught a king yet, but for me, it was more the sense of adventure. And so the fish that we chose to go after was a sheefish, which is the largest member of the whitefish family, and it's predatory. So basically, you're throwing streamers at them, which is kind of my bag. If you give me the opportunity, even on a huge blanket dry fly hatch, I'll still throw junk. That's kind of that. And so my buddy proposed. He's like, "Hey, let's get you to Alaska." Yeah, I'm like, "Oh man, what are we gonna go do? We're gonna go bead for stuff. Like, what are we gonna do?" And I'm like, he's like, "No, we're going to the Arctic Circle." And I was like, "Phew, all right, here we go. Arctic Circle, haven't been there. That's on the bucket list." And then he's like, and I'm like, "So what's the deal?" He's like, "You ever heard of a sheefish?" Of course, I was like, "No." He's like, "So we Googled it. Huge thing that looks like they call it tarpon of the north. I'm in. Eat streamers. I'm in." So we put together five of us total, and did a DIY trip to the Kobuk River, in the gate that starts in the gates of the Arctic National Park and is above the Arctic Circle. And what's sheefish holding water? None of us had an idea. I talked to my buddies that had guided in Alaska and spent a lot of time up there. Like, yeah, we catch them, but it's usually when we're fishing for other things. And so that's where our adventure started. And of course, we fly in the Brooks Range Aviation in a weather storm, and sure enough, we were able to pack light enough that we got in one beaver in a javelin. So we were able to do one flight and not get screwed like you usually do, where you end up being flown in first and none of your gear or tent is there and the weather's socked in. And of course, we got Chatty Cathy, who we nicknamed our pilot, because we show up and we're like, "Okay, what's it look like flying? A bunch of flights been canceled." He's like, "I'm hungry. I'm gonna finish my lunch. I'll come out." So we're looking over our gear, shows up with the truck and just starts loading gear. Doesn't say anything. And my buddy Brent goes to him, "So, what do you think? You think we're flying today?" Yep. That's about the extent that we had for the whole flight in the Brooks Range with about 150 feet of visibility and flying about 2,000 feet off the deck through cloud banks into the lake. And it was he starts a Haviland, the rain starts socking in, and through every rivet line, we got water dripping through. And it's held together with duct tape and everything. His safety talk was, well, there's a fire extinguisher there, but it's under all your shit. And so we fly in, and you look at the only thing on this plane looks better than a commercial kitchen. This high-end commercial kitchen is that engine. So we knew at least the engine would go, but maybe the fuselage would just rip off, you know? And so we got in there and got dropped off at the lake and floated the Kobuck for about 75 miles till the first Inuit village and took out there chasing sheefish.
So you had the raft with you in the beaver too?
Yeah, so we did. There were 5 of us total, and we were able to do 2 rafts with all our gear and back. And so we packed super light and backpacker gear, a lot of freeze dried stuff just to make weight so we could do one flight. And essentially, we ate fish as our only protein besides smoked sticks and jerky and
Bear food.
bear food, just bear food. And the lake, you know, we caught pike, and then we floated out of the lake down a small tributary and got into some grayling water. And we had read somewhere on some deep Reddit post, deep engrossed at like 2 in the morning, about, well, if you're in the Arctic up above the circle, you should throw mice patterns for grayling. And I was like, shit, you've seen a mouth on a grayling. Are they gonna get that thing? Sure enough, we get in that grayling water and we catch our first grayling on a streamer. We're chucking some stuff around. It eats and it's like, oh. So my buddy Crouch and I, of course, that's when it's like, oh, get the mouse patterns. Let's see how that's what I want to do. So get the mouse pattern out there. And most of the time we throw, like when I tie mouse patterns, we tie them with a trailing hook more towards the back, and because that increases your hookup rate on the mice with like a big brown or big rainbows, you know, big predators that are going to do that. Well, we throw that thing out, giving a little twitch, swimming across. 2 grayling come out of nowhere and smack at this thing. We miss them. And so we continue to do this. The grayling are going nuts for these things because it's basically you're out there and the landscape there is primarily tundra. So you've got all those voles and everything that's coming. They see a lot of these guys. Plus, it's the Arctic, so like if there's food, you eat. That's the rule in the Arctic. If you see food, you just eat it. So we keep missing them, and my buddy Craft's like, okay, I got these. Let's see what other patterns. So we got some more traditionally tied ones that the hook's more in the center of the body. As soon as we put that on, every single one we hooked because they weren't just chasing and snatching; they were just going after these things.
Wow. How big were these grayling?
The biggest one we caught and taped was like 23 inches, man.
That's a big grayling. Man, well, I guess when you're eating mice and voles.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was fun for about a day and a half.
That's crazy. Is that a thing? I haven't heard much about grayling eating mice.
Dude, we found it on a deep dark Reddit board at 2:30 in the morning, scheming about adventures that were either tropical or dark deep holes like Kamchatka and things like that.
Nice job digging up that research. You would have got there and yeah, and been unarmed or not even known about it, I guess. But wow, what a cool
Yeah.
experience. You know, I've only had one experience like catching those big grayling up in Saskatchewan, and I had a hard time getting a chubby in their mouth.
Yeah. Exactly, dude. Like you're like, I mean, and they were eating legit mouse patterns. Like we didn't skimp. We're like, well, if you're gonna eat a mouse, man, you're gonna eat a freaking mouse.
Wow, that's really cool, huh? And on the Sheefish, like how successful was the Sheefish mission?
Okay, so here we are. It's day 4. Man, we haven't seen a sheefish. Like like my buddy crowd, like the 5 of us, we've been like we're fishing fast water, we're fishing deep pools. I mean, we've got different we've got in our boat with Jason and I were in one boat together. My buddy Crouch, and then my buddy Joe Gertson, who lives here in town, who does the handmade leather bags, leather and canvas, Gertson Adventure Equipment. He's in our other boat with his 2 buddies from South Africa, who we've done some trips with. And I mean, man, we're pulling over, working runs, trying different retrieves. We haven't seen a lick of a sheefish. And so we're like, oh man, what are we doing here? Like, man, okay. So it's day 4, and we're starting to pick up more and more water. We're starting to get some bigger braids, some bigger tributaries coming in, and we're just prospecting. And I'm rowing, and we're going down, and there's some big boulders on a nice little bend, and my buddy Crouch pops in this nice shot behind the boulder, goes 1, 2, 3, lets it start sinking because we're using heavy sink tips, 300 grains on 7 weights, and dropping them down. Gets a tug, and the next thing you know, we're hooked in to the first sheefish of the trip. And it all of a sudden jumps out of the water, starts heading downstream. I'm rowing after it, and we're like, holy shit, there are sheefish here. Okay. Game on. And so 25 minutes finally before we get this thing, I find a place to pull over. We can get the fish in, take a look at this thing, and be like, oh my God, it is a sheefish. So that was our first sheefish. And then about 15 minutes later, the river did a big divide where it braids for about a mile and a half and then comes back together. And we chose this left channel, and right at the top of that, my buddy Brent throws in a streamer right before we take that braid and gets a look from a sheefish. And there's this beautiful run that we all pull over, and all of a sudden we start getting in the sheefish. And what it was a big upstream cast, as far as you can cast, let it sink, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, give it 3 bounces, and they'll eat. And there we are. We spent about 4 hours there hooking in the sheefish. At one point, all 5 of us were hooked in the sheefish.
So did they earn the moniker Tarpon of the North? How'd they fight?
Dude, they fought great.
That's what I've heard.
It wasn't a dog fight. It was, they'll run, they'll jump. They're the Tarpon of the North, man. They're amazing. And so we got to this other place that reminded me a lot of the Missouri. It was where 2 braids came back together in this huge eddy that you could do a row around. We spent 8 hours there taking laps through where, like, the other boat had 2 anglers. They'd double up on sheefish, row down, we'd enter our 1 angler in our boat. Jason and I were taking turns, just hook up, fight, hook up, fight. We did that for 8 hours. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in the world.
Wow, man, you guys cracked the code.
We cracked the code because then we started monkeying with stuff because we tried different weights. And what we were finding is what we were watching is we finally got some visibility because the Kobuck runs that really interesting, like, tannin color. It's not that glacial till. It has this really tanniny color, kind of like the Big Hole gets or like Rock Creek gets when it has.
Or the Smith.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're like, you can't really ever see what the structure is down at the bottom. You just kind of have to use Braille, And what we were finding is that sheefish are interesting because what they do is they spend their time out in the bays in the salt and then head up river to spawn. And so they school up. And what we
Gotcha. So they're like steelhead or
Yeah,
salmon or
exactly,
yeah.
exactly, and they're moving, and we were hitting them. Where we hit them was where they were on in their spawn. Once we started finding their densities, as we got lower and lower in the tributary, we found more and more sheefish. Um, and so we found this nice resting spot where we were doing this row around, and so Jason and I started experimenting with it, like, well, will they take a top fly? Will they take a popper? Will they take this? Will they take that? And what we were finding is we actually got to see a couple of them actually feed. And what they were doing is some of the fish would push off the bottom and push bait fish up, and then the other fish would come in and eat the bait fish.
Gotcha. Huh.
So
Interesting.
it was a really interesting retrieve. So what you do is you wanted that line down deep, so it got in front of them, and then you kind of did strip, 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 give it a little bit more erratic, like they were moving scared, and that's when you get a hit.
Wow, right on. What flies were working best for you? What color streamer? How big were they?
Well, there's only one color streamer. That's white. Let's just be honest. White, like I
That's
mean,
true.
I mean, you can outfish me all day on a black sextant, but my white one's a better fly because it's white.
Oh man, you'd have a good time with Kelly Gallup while he's switching around colors every 10 minutes. I fished with him one time.
Kelly Kelly's got his system, and I'll work that when I'm fishing clients with streamers.
Of course. That's all he was doing too.
But my personal man, I it's white. Like I'll try
Yeah.
something else. I'll fish it for 5 minutes and be like, "Well, that thing sucks." Even if I get a grab on it, it's like white'll do. I mean, they'll eat it now. They'll eat it now.
So how much info did you guys have going into this trip? Like how much did you know about the river? I mean, when you're coming up to one of those braids, you're just kind of rolling the dice or how much beta were you able to gather ahead of time?
So we pulled off. We laminated a bunch of the standard topos. So we had those with us. Plus, we all had GPSs. And like, man, you know how GPSs are. You got your Onyx map, and like the next thing you know, all those braids change every year. At some points, we're traveling via raft for 2 miles across ground, according to the GPS.
Right.
So what we only had two boats, and what we used those BCA link radios, those handhelds that have pretty good coverage, and
Yeah.
we were able to get about a mile apart and still be in contact. So like
Nice.
whoever was in lead boat would be like, okay, so if you look at the map as we're coming up, you're gonna come to a braid, and it's gonna be 1, 2, 3. We're gonna take the second one because that one looks at the map like the bet that has the most water and should be the most likely to go through.
Wow, man, what an awesome adventure.
Well, because the other thing that happened right before we got up there is that was right when Alaska got torrential downpours in early August. So the river had jumped 25,000. Um, let's see, it jumped 25,000 CFS. It had gone from 25.
25,000.
It had gone from 25,000 to 50 grand.
Oh, it doubled. Ouch.
It doubled. And so we were hitting it on the drop because like, I mean, my buddy Jason looks at me like 3 days before the trip. And like, we were looking and we were seeing that it was dropping. And he's like, well, what are we going to do if it's blowing out? I'm like, we're going to treat it just like we do in Montana. Yeah, it's blowing out. It's muddy. They'll eat something. Dad's on an Alaska trip. Fuck, we're flying tomorrow morning.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no bar you can float to and hole up at.
Exactly. Like this isn't like, oh yeah, oh the root's blown out. Oh, let's head to the mow. The mow will fish. Like, what do
Right.
you want to do, Jason? Like, we're going to stop in Anchorage and ship all our stuff from Brooks Range Aviation? Where are we going to get our boats?
Wow, man, that's an awesome trip. If you ever go do that again, you save a seat for me.
Oh, I will, buddy. There's a couple other Sheefish rivers that are on my radar.
And now a brief message from our sponsors. Introducing the Triced All-Fly Kit, Composite Development's latest game-changing innovation. Utilizing the same butt section, the All-Fly morphs from 5-weight to an 8-weight via interchangeable sections. Need a little more length? Pop the extender into place and the 9-foot rod becomes a 10-footer. All housed within an ingenious tri-folding magnet rod tube, the All-Fly is the most versatile fly fishing tool ever devised, negating the need for multiple rods. Switch from delicate presentations with tiny parachutes to hucking gaudy coneheads. This package must be seen to be believed. Go to cd-fishing.us, click the video tab, and see the Triced All-Fly in action. And remember to go fishing.
Well, you've been a guide here in Missoula for how long, Travis?
Oh, I've been rowing a boat either in whitewater or fishing for 23 years. I've guided here in Missoula. I've guided on the Maine salmon. I've guided on the Colorado. I've guided on the Oahe. I've guided on the Green, in Utah and Colorado.
Long time, man. And so, how do you keep it fresh? Because for me, I'm in my third stint now as a guide, and guiding for me now is just kind of a side hustle. And it works better for me that way because that way I don't get burned out. I still enjoy my personal fishing, and I come up with little systems, to keep it interesting. Like for instance, this year I've tied 6 dozen dry flies the last month, and the trips that I already have on the books, notwithstanding, when those 6 dozen dry flies are gone, I'm calling it quits for the year. So what do you do? What do you do to keep it fresh and interesting?
I think what's really rejuvenated me is, like, for me, it's these trips that I plan with my friends to go to have that adventure. And now with 2 little kids, my son Thorin, he just turned 6 this last June, and right before his birthday, during the salmon fly hatch, his birthday is June 19th, he caught his first trout all by himself on a dry fly. So, like, if I
Awesome.
have a day off at all during guide season, I take my kids out. And that keeps me fresh because, like, for them it's sharing, teaching, and, like, that same stretch of river over and over again. I think the other thing is me personally, I couldn't guide somewhere that I only had 30 miles of river to guide on. Like, that's
Right.
why I like West Central Montana. I mean, we have, depending on how you measure and how far you want to drive, within an hour and a half drive, we got 320 floatable river miles, I think. And that's not counting the creek or if you want to do a rocket ship to the Mo. So
Yeah,
I mean,
it's unbelievable.
so if you're clever and not afraid, like, I'll take the channel less chosen and go poke around because, like, at this point, most of my clients are repeat clients, so I know what I'm in for. I
No
know
blind
I
dates.
know that Doug and Murph are gonna be an hour late. I know how many
Right.
I know how many beers are gonna get crushed in the cooler, and, like, if we have to make the day, like, we got a 3-hour window here before we need to buckle down, get what we need, and then we can float.
Right.
I think that helps with not having the burnout factor. And the other thing is what I've started to see now too is a lot of my clients are bringing people that haven't fished much, and then watching them float down the canyon. The canyon on the Blackfoot, it's crowded, But if you choose your window right and get someone who's never fished on the Blackfoot, they're blown away by it. You know,
Right.
you're catching wild West Slope cutthroat. You know, you're catching wild trout. I mean, I think that's what we sometimes fail to say in Montana is, you know, these aren't stocked fish. You know, we led the charge in catch and release. Like, these are wild fish. This isn't a dog. This isn't this big rainbow that came out of a stock tank that's just and I'm all goofy. You know,
Right.
These are wild reproducing fish. And we live in a pretty magical place, and to watch some people experience it for the first time and be able to share with them kind of because my degree's in wildlife biology, so it's not just the whole idea for me is that we're not just, you can be a fish pimp if you want, you know, like how many fish I put in the boat today, how big were they, you know, fishing's a major component of it, but it's also the experience. You know, we've got wild fish. We've got, where else can you float by Scotty Brown Bridge that sees how many people from Paws Up, how many people from Ebarl, everyone visiting. And the next thing you know, you look over in the bushes and you got a big mature grizzly bear ripping out a bank trying to eat muskrats. So if you're creative, you're sharing these experiences with people that this might be the only time they fish in Montana, you know, or actually get to see a grizzly bear. You know, they go back to like New York or they live in the city, and like this is it for them. So I think for me, it's sharing that experience, and like when they go back, they think back to Montana and like, yeah, this actually, we want to take care of these resources.
Right on, man. Yeah, and you know, you make a good point there too. Western Montana is unique and special in the fact that when you meet your clients in the morning, you have like 40 different floats that you can choose from. So there's years where I don't do the same. I might not float the same stretch in the same season sometimes.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there's years where I was like, oh, you know what? I didn't even float anglers to Woodbridge last year. Huh? I forgot about that. You know, it's just there's so much water.
It always makes it sporty because if you don't float that section that year and the next year, you're like, oh, let's go do that. And you're like, oh God, like this year was a prime example that the root went big. And at one point I texted Russell Parks and I was like, hey man, this is where I am in the river. This doesn't look anything like I've ever seen.
That's what's so crazy about guiding around here, man. It's just it's so dynamic. It's constantly changing, and it impresses me, the you know, guys like yourself, your Josh Lowers, you know, there's a long list of them, Brooks Jessen, we could go on and on here, of guys that have been here for a long time, Jay Dixon, and you know, just the wealth of knowledge, just due to the fact that it's so dynamic and you have to know so many different stretches, and some of the stretches don't fish as well at 2,500 CFS as they might at 2,200 CFS. And it's amazing how much knowledge the guides around here have. They're like I liken them to permit guides that know the tides, or you know, really good steelhead guides, which are rare and hard to find.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, this place is dynamic. And you have to, you know, as we've seen this past season, more and more people are rediscovering the outdoors, you know, and things are getting busier and busier. And to have that ability to be able to spread that traffic out, because that's what we have to do for the resource, you know. And I also always equate it like with my folks. They always ask me on those multi-day trips, you know, they're here for a week, and they're like, oh, Travis, when are we going to double down? When are we going to double down? Because I just had that tendency, like there's that you fished with folks over the years, and you get that like 2 or 3 day, you're like, okay, that first day we're gonna get into some fish, we're gonna just get everybody reacquainted, And then there's always that double down day, where you're like, oh man, I think that section will fish, And I always give them the wide open. I'm like, we're doubling down today, boys.
So what do you think the answer is here, given the fact that we're kind of at the saturation point as far as fishing pressure goes on these rivers, which are freestone rivers, and like you mentioned with wild fish, we're not the Missouri where we're in not that those aren't wild fish, but it's just a different situation. It's a big tailwater, with a much different protein structure, much different habitat than these freestone rivers with wild fish and some native fish, west slopes, of course, and bull trout. And how do you feel about the present state of the fishing pressure? And do you think there's anything that needs to be done to alleviate it?
What I see is, Missoula. I'll just use Missoula as the example because that's where we live. Everybody has some form of water transportation. We've got so much water here, and this goes beyond public versus commercial. There's always the big debate, like how many outfitters, how many this, how many that. But if you look, there used to be that when I started, there used to be that whole thing. Like when you called in the morning, like I'll be honest, like Pat, rest his soul, and Boyle, Tommy, they hold the most power in the community. If you're
Right.
doing shuttles, man, they can give you the best information in the world. And it used to be when you always had like 3 sections of the river you wanted to fish that day with your people, and you called in, and like if there were 2 boats there, you just didn't go.
Right.
You audibled, And now what I see a lot of is like, people stack 7 boats in on top of 4 other boats. And so I think we just have to. I think it first starts with having the dialogue between your group of the clique of outfitters and guides that are working together, and like going back to that old idea, like spread this out, you know. And I think the other part of it, and this is just my 2 cents on it, is that if you buy like an inner tube to go float the river, that there's just like $1 attached to it, like the Pittman-Robertson Act. With like, if you look at Sportsman's Pittman-Robertson Act, buy shells, optics, or anything hunting wise, that goes into a conservation fund used to restore the habitat.
Yeah, and it's Dingle Johnson is the one for fishing products, for tackle.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
I pay it for my rod business.
Right. And so the consumers pay that when they buy stuff for those things, and that goes directly to funding natural resource projects, And so if we were to do that with tubes and things like that, we could take that money and clean up the sites, and that money could help maintain sites and maybe make accesses easier, that we're not eroding banks, we're not getting these side trails.
Well, similar to, as outfitters, we pay a commercial FAS fee in Montana, which makes sense because we use the boat ramps a lot. So I get it,
right,
and I'm still paying it.
I will pay that all the time, but I just want some cost share. I want a little bit of a little bit of that, because I think that's not much to ask, because we've definitely, when we're all floating down the river, we pull over and pick trash up all the time,
Yep.
I've spent 20 minutes in a hole down in a log jam, digging out 150 beer cans, and putting them in the boat or this and that,
And not all of them were yours.
No, no. But that's what I think. And I think the other part is, I think there needs to be some better education tools out there for people that are new to floating on like how to use a ramp, that you don't post up on a ramp. When you enter the ramp, you get in and out,
Right.
I think Idaho I mean, if you go over to Idaho and you go on the big four, the four permitted rivers in Idaho for whitewater, primarily whitewater, Hell's Canyon, the Selway, the Middle Fork of the Salmon, and the main salmon. Man, you watch a lot of people, public, like private or commercial, they know what you do on a ramp. You get in and out.
Right.
You see
Yeah.
a lot more or less junk shows over there because they've done a really good job with educating people on that. And, FWP has started the campaign about that, but it's almost like if you go and buy a boat at a shop, you should get kind of a little guide that comes right with it. Like, hey, here are some etiquette and tips that'll help enjoy your experience.
Right. So we're not running into Florence Bridge at 5 p.m. on Friday night.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not running into a crusty person that their patience is fried by October.
Yeah. Right. So Travis, in addition to being a guide and an outfitter, you are also the director of the Avalanche Center, correct? And if you'll give me your full title there.
So I'm the director of the West Central Montana Avalanche Center, based out of here in Missoula, Montana. Our advisory area covers from Lost Trail Pass in the southern Bitterroots west to around Superior, and then north to the Sealy Swan, so the divide of the Swan River there in the Southern Missions and Southern Swans. And essentially what I do is, between myself and the forecasters and telemetry from our snowtail sites, it also shows how much snowpack we have in the mountains. We create avalanche forecasts for our backcountry recreationalists. So if you're cross-country skiing, if you're backcountry skiing, snowboarding, or if you're backcountry snowmobiler, we're rating an avalanche danger rating for those particular users on national forest ground.
Gotcha. And how have the conditions been this winter? It's been a weird winter.
It's been a really interesting winter. If you look at our basin averages, we're just below 90% in all our drainages, and that varies by the time snippet and time, but we're a little bit below average, but it's just like fire season. What's high water looks like. There's a lot of variables that go into it. It's been predominantly warmer. We know that for a fact. We haven't had those cold snaps. Our avalanche conditions have fluctuated since we have had a shallower snowpack in lower and mid elevations. We've definitely had some more elevated avalanche danger this year than we have in years past. But we're still trending. There are still deep parts of our snowpack. A majority of it is at this point, above 7,000 feet. We just haven't gotten that lower elevation snow. Like when we've had rain events in the valley, we're getting snow up high,
Gotcha. So what's that going to? I understand all of this is speculation.
Oh, you want me to look in the crystal ball? I'll look in the crystal ball.
No, just a little bit. Just a little bit. When am I fishing green grapes? Give me the date. Give me the afternoon. No, but what is that? The lack of low elevation snow, generally speaking, what does that mean for the runoff and the river levels?
I think I personally like what I've been talking to the people out at NOAA at the Weather Service. I think with not having that low and mid elevation, squall season could be rocking. Let's just be honest, we're not going to be kicking ice out of boat ramps. And also without that lower elevation snow, in those days, the days where that river bumps just because all that low elevation snow just drops into the watershed, it could mean that we have a little bit more consistent flow, not the ebb and pulse that we sometimes see during squall season. So I also really just look forward to squall season.
Me too, man. What's your favorite bug?
Oh, my favorite bug for squall season is one of mine.
What do you call it?
What do I call it? I call it Frankie, Frankenstein.
Right on. You've been tying a bunch of those lately?
I got about a dozen.
When those dozen are up, are you going to call the cancel squall season?
No, because then I'm just gonna put on a big pheasant tail dry.
There you go. There you
throw,
go.
And throw that over into that soft water and watch that brown just freaking move 10 feet forward and whack the hell out of it.
Right on. And your guide service is Thunderhammer, right?
Thunderhammer fly fishing.
Now, what was the genesis of Thunderhammer? I've never heard this story, man.
I've got a lot of Scandinavian roots. My son's name Thorin is his first name. His middle name's Storm because he was born on the day he was born. We didn't have a middle name for him, but it snowed in the valley that day. And so I looked at my wife. I was like, okay, Storm's going to be his middle name. That's the only way. I mean, we've got snow in the valley. It's Rock Creek season, salmon flies. This is perfect. I've got my truck with the wrap rack in the parking lot because, of course, we were like 2 weeks late on the due date. And I had to call Russell. We had to get induced. And I'm like, Russell, I can't guide on the creek. I got to go watch my son get bored tomorrow. So his middle name's Storm. And, Thunderhammer, like, I believe that sometimes what we've done in fly fishing is sometimes we've done a disservice in that we've tried to create elite clubs. And my number one rule in the boat is that fishing is supposed to be fun. And if we're not having fun, let's change that. Everyone gets so caught up, and sometimes it can feel elitist, because you hear scotch, cigars, khaki, and like, oh, I'm gonna wear another khaki shirt, and I'm gonna have these Sims waders and this and that. Man, fishing's supposed to be fun, and you can get away with it. You have that person that's throwing an eagle claw rod, man, and they're catching fish. So like, if we're no longer that's why when I decided it's not like trout chaser, man, we're fishing. Thunderhammer fly fishing. So the Scandinavian part's Thunderhammer, and then it's fishing, and it's supposed to be fun. It's not we're just chasing trout. We're chasing an experience.
No doubt, man. And what's the best way for folks to find you?
You can go on the web and go to www.thunderhammerflyfishing.com.
Well, awesome, man. Well, thanks, Travis. Always good to catch up with you, and look forward to running some days with you this summer.
Go to thefebruaryroom.com where you can access a complete library of our podcast and read more about our guests, their fishing stories, and favorite fly patterns. We're always looking for exceptional fly fishing yarns, and if you have one to spin, shoot us an email at info@thefebruaryroom.com. The February Room is always free, but if you feel like throwing a nickel in the pond, we appreciate any additional listener support. For companies and individuals interested in sponsorship opportunities, please contact us for our media kit. Thanks for stopping by the February Room, and we'll see you down here next week.